Well, when I was a kid, up until the time I went away to college, I lived in the same house, in the same town for all my life. And I went to the same church for all my life. And so there were places that I went regularly. And there were people that I saw all the time. And some of them I saw every day. And I was used to a certain way of life, and I had good friends and people I was close to. And then I went away to college. And I was gone for a while. But while I was away, I thought about home often, and my friends and the things we did. And there were things and people I missed. And this was before cell phones, so phone calls were few and far between. But nothing changed, at least not in my mind. I didn't think anything had changed. And so I talked about my friends, and I talked about the things we did. And, while I was away, I still acted the way I did when I was back home, said the same things me and my friends used to say. But then I went back home for summer. And it wasn't the same. I mean, some people had moved on, and those who were still there had gone on with life without me. I kind of felt like I was just removed for a little while and was going to come back. They'd gone on with life without me. I mean, don't get me wrong. People were happy to see me, and we would catch up and talk. But then someone else came over and joined the conversation. The conversation shifted to something I knew nothing about, and I wasn't a part of. And I kind of felt like an outsider. And the person that I used to spend most of my time with, while I was away, he found himself a girlfriend. So everything changed. Home didn't really feel like home. It was strange, and it was a little discouraging. And I wonder if the Jews who returned from exile felt a little like this. I mean, they were back in the land, but many of them were born in Babylon. They had never even lived here before. And it was nothing like the stories that they had been told about the past. And those who had lived there before, well, it just wasn't the same. I mean, there was no king. There was no palace. There wasn't even a walled city for protection. Everything was different. There was no thriving society. And worst of all, there was no temple. And then on top of that, people around them started opposing them. And then, as time went on, they found out their crops aren't growing either. That would be discouraging. And you might wonder if you made a mistake coming back. You might wonder if God is really still for you, behind you, helping you. Is He supporting you? Is God still moving? At times, it may not look like it, but looks can be deceiving. This is true whether we're talking about them way back then or even us today. But as we continue reading in Haggai, God tells them that they have a reason to be encouraged. So look at Haggai, starting chapter 2, verse 1. It says, in the 7th month, on the 21st day of the month, the word of the Lord came by the hand of Haggai the prophet. Okay, so this is about a month after they had rearranged their priorities. They'd gotten that first message from Haggai, from God through Haggai, and rearranged their priorities and started to work on the temple. But the actual date that God gave them this message through Haggai is significant in and of itself, especially when you consider what he's talking about. You see, God will speak about them, will speak to them about the first temple, the one that Solomon had built, and this new temple that's being built. And it's the 21st day of the 7th month. On the 21st day of the 7th month, that falls within the Feast of Tabernacles. Now, it was during this same festival, about 440 years earlier, that Solomon first dedicated the temple. And so this is an appropriate, perfect time to give the people a message about rebuilding the temple and to encourage them. And there's another important thing about this timing here as well. It's been almost 2 months since they got the first message through Haggai. And so at that time, God had to challenge them with their bad attitude and their bad attitude about building the temple, because said it's not time yet. And he confronted their apathy and their misplaced priorities. And then they responded with a renewed commitment, and they started to work with enthusiasm. But now, almost 2 months later, they look at the foundation, and they see this pile of materials laying around that they've gathered up. And it's during the feast, so they wouldn't be working on it at this time. So it's just sitting there. And it appears that maybe they noticed the hugeness of this project that they have to accomplish. I've done that. You know me, I like to do work and I like to remodel and stuff like that. I've gathered stuff and then it just sits in my office. And I'm in the middle of a job that the materials sat in my garage, that's the word, sat in my garage for a few months. But anyways, but sometimes you look at the project and you start thinking, that's a lot of work. And it appears maybe they did that, noticed how huge this project was that they have to accomplish. And their enthusiasm is replaced with a feeling of being overwhelmed. At the same time, they may look at that foundation and the beginning of the building, and they notice how small and how plain, how simple this new temple building is, or is going to be. And maybe how unimpressive everything around them is. And they are underwhelmed. So it seems that maybe they're both overwhelmed and underwhelmed at the same time. And they are discouraged. Or at least they're headed in that direction. And so God brings them a message to help them. This is not a message of correction like the first one. This is a message of encouragement. So let's keep reading verse 2. God says to Haggai, he says, "Speak now to Zerubbabel, the son of Shealtiel, governor of Judah, and to Joshua, the son of Jehozadak, the high priest, and to all the remnant of the people, and say, who is left among you who saw this house in its former glory? How do you see it now? Is it not as nothing in your eyes?" So some people were old enough to remember the temple that Solomon had built. The temple had been big and ornate, and it was impressive to look at. But now it's torn down, it's demolished, it's gone, there's nothing left of it. But the temple now is in the process of being rebuilt. But the problem is this. Even with just the foundation and the beginning of the building, you can already see that it's small and simple. And it's nowhere as nice as the previous temple building. In fact, we read about this reaction in Ezra. How when the foundation of the temple was first laid, and while some of the people shouted for joy, others did what? Others who had seen the temple wept. And so there was this mixture of joy and sorrow. And the temple just wasn't the same. It won't be the same. And some of this may have come from nostalgia, just remembering the good old days. But that's not all it is. this building, this temple, is definitely smaller and not as nice. And it seems insignificant. And Haggai's words express exactly how they're feeling. He says, "Is it not as nothing in your eyes?" In other words, doesn't it look like nothing? And you know what? He gets no argument from them. It looks like nothing. It's nothing special. It's totally unimpressive. And this could be discouraging, even depressing. And God knows it. And so he gives them this message to encourage them. He continues in verse 4. He says, "Yet now be strong, O Zerubbabel, declares the Lord. Be strong, O Joshua, son of Jehozadak the high priest. Be strong, all you people of the land, declares the Lord. Work, for I am with you, declares the Lord of hosts. According to the covenant that I made with you when you came out of Egypt, my spirit remains in your midst. Fear not." So notice, after asking the question, does this look like nothing? God doesn't argue with them and say, it actually looks impressive. He doesn't say that it will actually be a great building. He doesn't say, hey, it'll be good enough. This isn't his concern here, what the building looks like. He simply gives them a command. And it starts with the words, "Yet now." So it looked unimpressive, yet now, go do this. So even if it looks unimpressive, do this. It may look like nothing to them. They may have reason to feel disappointed. But God will tell them that they have more reason to be encouraged. And he tells them to be strong. That's sometimes translated as take courage. But it's literally be strong. He's telling them to stand up. Don't mope around. Don't get down. Don't give up, but keep going. And he says, work. And so get to work and don't let anything stop you. But he doesn't stop there. He tells them how they are able to do the work. And what is it? I am with you. It may be too hard. I am with you. You see, they can have confidence and they can have strength because God is with them. He is behind them. He is helping them. And he had told them this before. But this time, he adds a little more to it. He tells them why he's with them. Why? Because he made a covenant with them when he brought them out of Egypt. So a long time, hundreds of years earlier, he made a covenant with them. And he had made promises. And he was in a special relationship with them. And he's saying that that relationship, that covenant, it hasn't changed. So even though they've been off in Babylon for 70, that covenant has not changed. God is faithful to his promise that he made. But not only does he tell them why he's with them, but this promise to be with them and this command to be strong, these two things together, they remind us of some things in Israel's past. First of all, when the people came out of Egypt, it reminds us of this, of the Exodus. God was with them. And he protected them, and he fought for them, and he provided for them, and his spirit was in their midst. And he adds, and he still is. My spirit was in your midst, and he still is. My spirit is in your midst. And secondly, after Moses had led the people of Israel for 40 years and he died and he left Joshua to lead them, this was a challenging position for Joshua to be in. I mean, he had some huge shoes to fill, let alone sometimes difficult people to work with. And he had to lead them in taking the land. And what did God tell Joshua? Be strong and courageous. Very similar. The same word, be strong. Be strong and courageous. And he told him to move forward because God would be with him. And he was to keep going and that God would make him successful. And so the most important thing is that God is with them. And God tells them, fear not. Because God is with them, they have no reason to fear. But this is not only encouragement, this is also a command. He says, I'm with you. So trust me and don't be afraid. But all in all, God is saying that it doesn't matter what things look like or how impressive or unimpressive something may appear. If God is in it, it will be successful. It will fulfill his purpose. God is working, and he'll do what he wants. So his people can be encouraged. Verse 6. For thus says the Lord of hosts, yet once more, in a little while, I will shake the mountains and the earth and the sea and dry land. And I will shake all nations, so that the treasures of all nations shall come in. And I will fill this house with glory, says the Lord of hosts. The silver is mine, and the gold is mine, declares the Lord of hosts. The latter glory of this house shall be greater than the former, says the Lord of hosts. And in this place I will give peace, declares the Lord of hosts. And so God continues to encourage them by telling them what he will do. So sometime in the future, God will do something that he's done before, because he says, yet once more, I will do this. But sometime soon, God will turn the powers of the world upside down and will rearrange the social structure of the world. And he uses these two phrases, the heavens and the earth, and the sea and the dry land. Now, each of these phrases means everything. The heavens and the earth, in other words, all of creation. The sea and the dry land, in other words, all of the earth. So both of these words or phrases mean everything. So using both of these phrases together really emphasizes this. And he says, nothing will be left unaffected by this. So God will shake up everything. Now, when he does this, he says that the treasures or the desired things of the nations will be brought to the temple. In other words, people from all the nations will bring tribute of gold and silver to God. Of course, it all belongs to him anyway. The gold is his, the silver is his, but it all belongs to him anyways because he is the creator and because he is God. And God's house, the temple, will be filled with glory. But notice this glory, when he talks about the temple being filled with glory, it's not people glorifying God here. God is filling his house with glory. He says, I will fill the house with glory. Of course, when you read this, does it make you think back to the cloud during the Exodus and during the time of wandering through the wilderness? The picture of God's presence and glory filling the tabernacle and filling the temple. God will once again be present with his people in this unique and special way. And it's God's presence that makes the temple glorious. It's not the great building. It's not the beautiful or expensive decorations. And then God adds that at some time in the future, the temple will have an even greater glory than it had in the past. And at that time, when it has that greater glory, God will bring peace. Of course, all this leaves us with a question. When did all this happen? Or has it happened? Well, some people have focused on the words "in a little while," and they think, well, it had to have happened very soon after Haggai's prophecy. And so they'll point to Ezra chapter 6, where the opponents try to stop the temple building project, and when they try to stop it, they end up being told they have to help pay for it. So they're bringing their silver and their gold to the temple. That could fit part of what was said here. And some have suggested that this was fulfilled in the fall of the Persian army, the shaking up of the world. And that would be a shaking up of power to some extent. But neither of these events, neither of these things in the past completely fulfill the description, or fits the description here that God gave in this prophecy. I mean, did the rebuilt temple have greater glory than Solomon's temple? Well, not really. I mean, it certainly wasn't bigger or more ornate. And there's no mention of the Shekinah glory ever returning to the temple. So then some have argued that Herod's renovations to the temple made it very impressive, and that's true. And they also say that when the prophet says that the treasure or literally desire of nations comes to the temple, that it refers to Jesus, the Messiah. But that seems to be a stretch. Jesus did return to the temple, and he did bring God's glory back to the temple in a sense. But that seemed to be a stretch of this word. But even if Herod made the temple building more impressive, and even if the desire of nation refers to Jesus coming to the temple, it still falls short of all that God promised. I mean, was there peace? No. I mean, not at all, really. At the time of Herod's temple, there was no peace. In fact, that temple was destroyed in 70 AD by the Romans. There was not peace. And so we would say that the fulfillment of this prophecy is still yet future. But is it a problem that he says, this house, and this house, the one that they were building at the time, was then destroyed? Well, no, it's not a problem. Because when God speaks of this house, he's not referring to a specific building, but to his house. He's speaking of his temple in general. If you notice, both here in these verses and back in verse 3, he talks about this house, and he refers to its former glory and its latter glory. The later glory. And so the first temple and the second temple buildings were both referred to as this house. He's just saying his house. They're equated as one, the same. They are God's temple. And so all in all, the rebuilt temple after the exile and the remodeling by Herod and all these other things that we talked about could be partial fulfillments. And they foreshadow the final temple that will have greater glory. And that ultimate fulfillment is yet future. You see, when God will overthrow all the powers of the earth, and Jesus will be present and will reign from Jerusalem, and there will be complete peace. And God tells them all, he tells them all of this to encourage them. He's in control. And his plan is still moving forward. He will do what he said he'll do. But like them, sometimes we may look around at things in our lives and wonder if God's doing anything. Is he still working? Is he still in control? Or maybe you see your current situation and you think, it's nothing like it used to be. Or you notice this and that, and this is not near as impressive as that. And you know what? That may be true. But it doesn't mean that God is not working. He is still in control, and he is doing what he wants. And whatever things may look like, he is still with you. Well, we got a couple more prophecies here that we're going to look at. And so now God gives another message through Haggai about an issue of obedience. Look at verse 10 through 12. He says, on the 24th day of the 9th month, in the 2nd year of Darius, the word of the Lord came by Haggai the prophet. Thus says the Lord of hosts, ask the priests about the law. If someone carries holy meat in the fold of his garment and touches with his fold bread or stew or wine or oil or any kind of food, does it become holy? The priest answered and said, no. And so God tells Haggai to ask the priests a couple of questions. And these questions are about ritual purity and uncleanness. And so he appears to be asking these questions to the priests, but in front of the people, because he will use this to teach them, like an object lesson to teach them. And so the first question, which we just read, it has to do with meat that has been consecrated to God. And so it has been offered to God, and it is now ritually clean or holy. It has been set apart for a sacred purpose, like an offering in worship or feeding the priests and the Levites. And so the question is this. So if someone has the front of their robe folded up, and they have the meat in the fold of the robe, so they're carrying it around in their robe, and as they're carrying it around, this holy meat, or the part of the robe that's holding this holy meat, touches some other food, because he's bringing it to the table or whatever he's doing. But it touches some other food. Does that make the other food holy? And the answer is no. You see, holiness does not transfer from one thing to another like that. Each thing would have to be dedicated to God and consecrated in order to be holy. So let's read the next question, verse 13. Then Haggai said, if someone who is unclean by contact with a dead body touches any of these, does it become unclean? The priest answered and said, it does become unclean. So now we see the opposite scenario. Haggai asks about what happens with when you make contact with a dead body or with the food, with someone. And so, first of all, you have to understand that anyone who touches a dead body, and according to the purity laws in the Old Testament, anyone who touched a dead body was ritually unclean. Okay, and they had to go through a process to be made clean again. So they were ritually unclean. And so, understanding that, what if that person who is now unclean touches any of those foods that were mentioned, including that meat that was holy, that was consecrated, that was set apart? Will they become unclean? And the answer is yes. Even that meat that had been holy would be now unclean. And so according to the Old Testament purity laws, even though holiness does not transfer through contact, impurity does. To put it simply, impure things make other things impure. Okay? And so now we get to the point. God is using this as an illustration or as an object lesson. Look at verse 14. Then Haggai answered and said, so is it with this people and with this nation before me, declares the Lord. And so with every work of their hands. And what they offer there is unclean. He says it's the same with the people. Doing something holy or some sacred action or going through some act of worship does not make someone holy. On the other hand, if a person does something in service to God or goes through an act of worship while they are unclean, it makes that act of service or worship unclean or not holy. And so for the remnant of Israel, their sin, that's what made them unclean in this picture. That's what he's talking about. Their sin, like their wrong attitude that they had and the wrong priorities that they had, they're disobeying God. Their sin made everything they did unholy. They weren't right with God. There was sin in their lives, and so even the religious activity was empty. So, doing good works and going through the motions of worship, even obeying God, doesn't make a person holy. On the other hand, sin defiles a person and everything he does. Okay, well, let's keep reading. Verse 15. Now then, consider from this day onward, before stone was placed upon stone in the temple of the Lord, how do you fare? In other words, how's life going? When one came to a heap of 20 measures, there were but 10. When one came to the wine vat to draw 50 measures, there were but 20. I struck you and all the products of your toil with blight and with mildew and with hail, yet you did not turn to me, declares the Lord. Consider from this day onward, from the 24th day of the 9th month, since the day that the foundation of the Lord's temple was laid, consider, is the seed yet in the barn? Indeed, the vine, the fig tree, the pomegranate, and the olive tree have yielded nothing. But from this day on, I will bless you. And so, he's still on the same subject right now of holiness and impurity. But he's bringing it home to the people. And he tells them 3 times to consider or think about it. And he reminds them what was happening before they started working on the temple. And this sounds very similar to what we read last week in the first chapter. Their crops are not producing well. They don't have very much. Their food and their wine, their drink is running out. But here he says it's because all of their work, all that they did was affected by sin. And there was sin in their life. And it defiled their work. It made it unclean, so God disciplined them. But what did they do? They didn't turn to him. But now, when we get to the end of those verses, it says that we find out that things are about to change. Because apparently they have changed their ways. And God says, starting this day, he will bless them. So we're not told what sins exactly they were committing here. And we're not told the whole conversation here either. But whatever it was, they listened to Haggai. And they responded to God's message. And they repented. They turned from their sin and devoted themselves to following God. And so now, he will bless them. So things had been bad. It may have looked like God wasn't doing anything, but he was. But it was sin that brought those bad consequences, and God was still there, and he was still working. He was disciplining them, and now he will be blessing them. In both situations and the whole time, he has still been with them and still working. And Haggai's last prophecy then, in verses 20 through 23, he says, the word of the Lord came a second time to Haggai on the 24th day of the month. Speak to Zerubbabel, governor of Judah, saying, I am about to shake the heavens and the earth and to overthrow the throne of kingdoms. I am about to destroy the strength of the kingdoms of the nations and overthrow the chariots and their riders, and the horses and their riders shall go down, every one by the sword of his brother. On that day, declares the Lord of hosts, I will take you, O Zerubbabel, my servant, the son of Shealtiel, declares the Lord, and make you like a signet ring, for I have chosen you, declares the Lord of hosts. And so this message was given on the same day as the previous one about holiness and cleanness. But this one is specifically for Zerubbabel. And God is about to do something really big, he tells them again. And he says again that he will shake the heavens and the earth. And so all the earth will be affected by what he does. And like he said before, he's going to turn things upside down. But here he adds that he will overthrow and destroy the strength of kingdoms. So God is going to put down any and all adversaries. And this looks ahead to the great battle where nations that oppose God will be defeated. And there will be a reorganizing of power on the earth, or reorganizing of rule in the world. And it will all be God's doing. God makes it clear when he says, I will do this. I will do this. God is sovereign. He is in control. God makes his choices, and he does what he wants. And when he overturns the powers of the world, he says that he will make Zerubbabel the new ruler. That Zerubbabel will be God's authorized representative on earth. Now, how do we see that he will be God's representative on earth, authorized representative? We see this in the illustration of the signet ring. He says, I will make you my signet ring. Now, a signet ring was used to authorize and authenticate documents, a lot like your signature does on a contract or on a document or a letter today. And the signet ring, it carried the full weight and authority of the king. And the ring would be worn on the finger of the king. And so this also pictures a closeness and intimacy with God. And to call someone God's signet ring suggests that he is a unique and special servant. And this imagery, it was used of the kings of the past, the Davidic kings in the past, and it is now used of Zerubbabel. But even though Zerubbabel did lead Judah, and he oversaw the rebuilding of the temple, and even though he was highly respected, he never became king. And all of the nations were not overthrown in his lifetime. These things were never fulfilled in his lifetime. So what's going on here? Well, Zerubbabel stands here as a representative of the Davidic royal line. He is a descendant of David. And he is a type or a foreshadow of the greater king to come. The king who will overthrow the nations and who will rule over all. This promise is fulfilled in Jesus. This is a promise of the restitution of the Davidic king. And it's a confirmation of the Davidic covenant, the covenant that God made with David, in which God promised that David would have a dynasty that would be forever. The throne belongs to David's line forever. And God will make Israel secure, and he would do it through the king. He did it through David, his descendants. Ultimately, this is fulfilled in Jesus, the Messiah. But this message to Zerubbabel is very significant, especially because of what God had said through the prophet Jeremiah. And we saw this a while back, but in Jeremiah 22, God used similar language when he was speaking to Zerubbabel's grandfather, Jeconiah. And God said that if Jeconiah was his signet ring, God says, I would tear you off on my finger. Jeconiah was sinful. He was a bad king. And this is a strong picture of God disowning the king. And it suggests that the king no longer represents God. But then God also went on and said that Jeconiah would be taken into exile in Babylon, and that none of his descendants would sit on the throne. It appears that the Davidic rule was taken away. So what would become of the covenant? Well, here in Haggai, as God addresses Zerubbabel, the curse is reversed in Zerubbabel, Jeconiah's grandson. So now God says that he will make Zerubbabel his signet ring. And God is restating and reasserting the Davidic covenant promises to faithful Zerubbabel. And so from Zerubbabel, David's line continues down on to Jesus. You can read it in the book of Matthew. Things looked bad, but God was still moving. He's working his plan, and he will do greater things than the people could ever imagine. It can be easy to get discouraged when things aren't going well, or when they appear to not be going well. But we know that God is still working. God is going to do what he wants to do. His plan will be successful, and he is still moving. Sometimes it may look like God's not doing anything, but looks can be deceiving. No matter what things look like now, God will do great things. No matter what things may look like now, God is in control. So be encouraged. If you belong to Jesus, God is with you, and he's still moving.